Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Eleanor Coleman. Hi, Eleanor. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're in the finance industry. How did you find yourself in the finance industry in Hong Kong?
Well, a bit of an odd story. My first degree was in biology and I then did a master's because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I found an opportunity online to come and work for a financial company. And I was a little naive. They promised the world. So I came over to Hong Kong, quite green, quite fresh off the boat, and realized the company I was working for was appalling. However, I absolutely fell in love with Hong Kong. So I quickly found another job. And I've been in Hong Kong ever since. But I also fell in love with the finance industry. I fell in love with helping people and being able to make a difference.
Finance is such a big thing in Hong Kong. There's a lot of money in Hong Kong. There's a lot of big money. Do you feel like there's a greater need for financial advisors in Hong Kong than there might be in other countries?
The word finance covers a multitude of sins. So there's a lot of people who work in finance, and that might be someone who works in banking, but it also might be someone who works in fintech. And there's a massive umbrella of the term finance. In terms of what I do, which is personal financial advice, I think everybody needs it. We don't get taught at school how to balance a checkbook. We don't get taught how to do our taxes or what the best way of investing is. We get taught the skills that we need for our lives, but we don't actually get taught the practicalities of how to manage our own money. And a lot of us, when we go to university, especially if we're going far away from home for the first time, can feel incredibly lost. And then it's more of a sense of trial and error to be able to get yourself in a position where you feel like you're comfortable with your finances. A lot of it is based on your upbringing and how your parents or your caregivers, their attitudes to money are and what your experiences behind that are. But we all have a very different attitude and a very different experience with money. And some people can find it very intimidating.
Do you think it's important for parents to teach their children the value of money and talk to them about budgeting and finance and making their money work for them and things like that when the children are little, maybe giving them pocket money and making it last and think about how they're going to use it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a very odd concept that in Hong Kong, a lot of the part-time jobs that, if you were in the UK or in Australia or in the States, part-time jobs where you'd be working in a shop or working in McDonald's, for example, they're already taken by people who can work full-time. So not many teenagers have jobs. Therefore, a lot of teenagers don't get to see the value of earning money. And because Hong Kong is such an odd place for people to grow up, it's a very safe place. It's a very secure place. People don't necessarily grow up understanding the levels of poverty and how easy it is to misspend money. And if mum and dad are always the go-to and can always step in, there is a danger that kids will end up going to university and thinking, well, I can just spend what I want because mum and dad will step in at some point. And then there's a question of when does that cut off and what happens at that stage? So the earlier that you talk about money with your kids, the better. The other side of things, and something I'm finding a lot more with some of the bigger families that I have as clients, is that as the matriarchs, the older couple of the family, they may have never discussed their finances with their kids. And it might be a very taboo subject. And this happens a lot with big Chinese families and big Indian families who tend to keep all their wealth together. You might have a situation where parents are starting to get dementia and they're starting to not be able to take care of themselves, but have never discussed their finances or what they want to happen with their money with any of their kids or grandkids. And suddenly you've got a lot of family all trying to weigh in on something they've never actually experienced and never had to deal with. So it's a really odd situation where it might feel like you're protecting your kids from having to make these grown-up decisions, but in the end, you're not really setting them up to be proper adults.
Yeah, you're disempowering them in many ways,
Absolutely.
Aren't you? Because they don't have the knowledge and the skills that they're going to need at some point in their lives.
Absolutely. And in Hong Kong, it's very easy. I mean, we have access to, there's things like Deliveroo. A lot of us are very privileged to have helpers at home. And if you're sending your kids off, if they can't do their own laundry and they can't cook and they can't look after their own finances, there's going to be a rude awakening when they get to universities, especially if you're bringing up kids in Hong Kong and they're going to university on the other side of the world. It can be a really rude awakening in what is traditionally quite a hard time for kids. If you're 18 and it's the first time you've been away from home, having to suddenly get all these day-to-day skills and have to master these as well as finding friends and working out which way's up and working out how to university can be incredibly demoralizing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. At school, I teach a subject called personal and professional skills. And in that subject, I teach year 12s and 13s how to budget at university. We do a cooking on a shoestring course. We learn how to iron. They want to know how to tie a tie. There's all these sorts of things that they're not skilled at home, and they're actually really wanting to learn it. And the kids that aren't doing this course are very envious of the small number of students that are doing this course because they're learning these skills.
A lot of people who work in the education industry, when they find out what I do, they do ask me to come and talk to their senior kids, maybe the ones doing economics in particular, but to do assemblies and to do things where you teach kids what is a credit card and how much trouble you can get in if you just assume a credit card means that you can just spend money and it's just free cash. And it's something that a lot of us get into trouble with when we go to university, and I'm not an exception at all. But it is very important for people to understand.
Let's go there. What are some of the dangers of having credit cards? Like, one of the things that many people don't realise is the interest rates are phenomenal, aren't they? I think in Hong Kong, they're around about 18%.
Well, it depends. Some of the credit cards here, I know that the Amex is sometimes as high as 47%. So basically, if you spend $100, you're going to have to pay $200 back at the end of the year. And if you leave it for a couple of years, you're going to end up paying a lot more back than you ever spent. So when you look at, if I'm going to buy this and I put it on a credit card, the credit card companies want you to spend as much money on there as possible because they get that massive profit. So they soften it by saying, here's your Asia miles, here's your buy one, get one free, or, a lot of them have deals where you get money off in certain restaurants, or you can go and reclaim a money back voucher. But all of this doesn't really detract from the fact that you're spending money that you don't necessarily have and you're living on credit.
What are your tips for managing credit with a credit card?
Well, if you're going to spend money on a credit card, you need to have the money in the bank to back it up.
Yeah. Don't spend more than you have.
Don't spend more than you have. I mean, you can use credit cards in a very sensible way to get the points and to get the Asia miles and to be able to take all these flights and do all these exciting things. But you've got to have a strategy. You can't just spend willy-nilly.
To avoid the interest, you have to pay it off within that month that you
absolutely.
use it. Isn't
Sometimes
that right?
It's 30 days or 60 days, but you need to know what it is. So make sure you look at the terms and conditions, and they will continuously send you terms and conditions again and again and again in the mail, and everybody looks at them and throws them away immediately. But it's very important to know how much interest are you going to be charged and when does the charging start.
I understand that you're working primarily with women and members of the LGBT community in Hong Kong. What prompted you to focus on that area?
I worked for a financial advisory company in Hong Kong, and then I was headhunted and I went to work for one of the big Australian banks. And then I was very lucky to work in retail and then private banking. And I decided that when I wanted to go back into the financial services industry, I wanted to create a safe space for women and LGBT plus couples to be able to come and talk to me and not feel patronized, to be able to ask questions about their finances and not feel like they're silly questions, because there aren't any silly questions. It's your money. You've worked really hard for it. And you need to be able to understand what it's doing and why you're investing in certain things and how you can feel like you're in control. Most people really don't like talking about finances. There was a survey done and 61% of women would rather talk about their own death than talk about their own money.
Is that right?
That's a terrifying statistic.
Wow.
Because yes, we're all going to die, but in the meantime, we're all going to need some money to live on. So what I wanted to do is create an environment where women particularly can come in and have a chat, and they can be very honest and say, look, my husband has always looked after the finances. Kids are older. I want to start looking after the finances. And I want to get an idea of what's going on. Equally, I have a lot of single friends who always assumed that they would get married at some point, and so never really set up a pension. And so they get to sort of 40 and think, well, what could I have done? What should I have done differently to make myself be more in a financially free position now? You also have people on the other end where they have gotten married, they've been blissfully happy, they've had the kids, and then something's happened. Either there's been a divorce or a death, and they're suddenly struggling to work out how to deal with their own finances for the first time in their lives. And if you've gone from having, let's say, your father look after your finances to going to uni to then getting married quite quickly afterwards, and if your husband's always looked after your finances, if you're suddenly in your 50s and you are now the sole breadwinner and solely in charge of the money for the family, it can be incredibly overwhelming at a time when you've got other things to worry about.
Like menopause.
Well, look, if something happened to my husband, and God forbid it ever did, the worst, the least important thing in my life would be trying to work out where his MPF is. And in knowing where your finances are as a couple, or knowing where your finances are as a family, is vitally important, because it takes some of the stress out of if something were to happen.
That's so important, isn't it? Because you never know what's going to happen. And I've got so many friends who have joint accounts with their husbands. They don't really have any idea even how much they earn or where it goes. And their husband does everything. And then suddenly the marriage falls apart and they don't even have any access to their own bank account. Like, I would advise my daughter, fine, if you're married and you want to have a joint account, then go ahead, but keep your own independent bank account as well.
Absolutely. And in Hong Kong, the way that probate works is that if something were to happen to you and everything's in joint names, everything that is in the name of the person who's died is frozen. So let's say you're happily married, your husband gets hit by a bus, God forbid, and you then have to work out where the money is. So you're trying to work out where the money is. Everything's in joint names, so everything is frozen. At that point, you're still trying to work out how to pay rent and how to pay school fees and how to pay for groceries. And if you don't have access to that money for, let's say, a year, that's when you can get really into trouble. And that's when a lot of people have used credit cards or have taken out loans in order to be able to fund the lifestyle that they've been living, even though they've got money. It's just been frozen by probate. So
Are you joking?
No, it's a shocking thing. Everything gets frozen here. If you don't have a will as well, the probate can take a long time. And a lot of people, especially expats who might have a will back in their home country, will assume that that works. When I did a survey of some of our clients, we worked out as a company, there were 80% of our clients didn't have a will in Hong Kong. Now, that is a worrying statistic. And actually, we've just taken on someone in-house to write wills for our clients because it's so important, not only for your money, but also if you are an expat and you have kids, who's going to look after them if something happens? Now, if something happens and you assume that your parents or your brothers or sisters or someone in the family will come and look after your kids, that's fine. But what happens to them in the interim between something happening to you and grandparents showing up from the States or Australia or Europe? What happens in the interim is that they end up in the social services system and they end up in an orphanage in Hong Kong. And people don't realize that about the way that it works over here, unless there's something in writing to say, my friend will pick up our children and look after them until our family shows up. Then the kids go into the social service system and it can be very damaging, especially for kids who don't speak Cantonese necessarily, going into a Cantonese-speaking orphanage whose parents have just died.
Unbelievable.
It really adds
I didn't know this
injury.
either.
Yeah, it's a terrifying situation. Unless you specify things in a will, the system just takes over.
Wow, that's scary. I have a Hong Kong will and an Australian will, and they're both they're both in the bank in my hometown in Riverton. In the event of my death, my daughter knows where my wills are. She knows where all my paperwork is, and she knows that I have a life insurance policy as well.
That's rare in Hong Kong. And what we do with our clients is we have something called My Documents. And so when we sit down with clients, we make a list of where everything is. And when we help them write their will, we make sure that everything is delineated. So you kind of say, right, I have this account with HSBC. This is the account number. This is my Citibank account number. This is my life insurance. This is this. This is where all the deeds are for this property. And this document, we keep a copy of it and you guys keep a copy of it. So if something happens, we can then step in and say, yes, there is a copy of all of the different accounts. And yes, we can help the next of kin to work out what to do, basically.
Wow, that's brilliant. That's a massive, massive point for anybody out there listening from Hong Kong. Sort out your wills and sort out the finances and make sure you've got your own account. Anybody.
Absolutely. And actually, one of the reasons I started working with LGBT plus couples is because for them, it's even more of a problem.
Is that because they're not recognised as,
Absolutely.
What's the word, married couples
Absolutely.
in Hong Kong?
So if your marriage isn't recognised here, and the assumption is that if you die intestate, if you die without a will, the assumption is everything will pretty much go to your spouse.
What was that word? Die intestate?
Intestate means without a will.
Okay, great. You learned a new word today.
So if you die without a will, essentially, if something were to happen to me, it would be an assumption that everything would go to my husband. And that's pretty much what most people would say in their will anyway. But if your marriage isn't recognised in Hong Kong, then who gets the money? Well, in Hong Kong, it's a very archaic process. So it could go to your father, for example, because he is seen as the head of the household. And then it could be split between siblings or other relatives. Now, let's say you've got a child with your husband or wife and your marriage isn't recognised. So what you need to do is make sure that if something happens to you, that child has both parents as a guardian to make sure that there isn't any difficulty in terms of the remaining spouse taking that kid home.
Wow.
So that's what I've been working on with a lot of couples. So, where I've got friends who have kids and they're planning more kids, they're kind of saying, well, we're married, so if something happens to me, my wife would take the kids. But if they don't recognize your marriage, then that's the problem.
Right. That's so important then for gay couples out there.
Absolutely.
To get support and get advice. So that
and it
you
also
can...
works with things like life insurance. So if you specify in your will that your spouse gets your life insurance, and let's say that's specified in a will in the States or a will in the UK, if Hong Kong doesn't recognize your spouse as being your spouse, then that can become an issue and it can lead to a longer probate process.
How long can probate last for?
Oh, good grief. Well, it can take forever. I have a great aunt that we're still dealing with her accounts and her estate, and she died 11 years ago.
In Hong Kong?
No, in the UK.
Probate anywhere can take a long time. And is this because she didn't have a will?
No, it's because we have an executor who is causing issues. And so if you've got family members who don't agree on something, it can take a long time.
An executor of the will is somebody who's nominated by that person to oversee all of the splitting up of all of the property and the finances and all of that.
And also, if you've got children, it's very important to have an executor who you trust to look after the money in terms of that. If I were to die tomorrow and have, let's say, a 15-year-old, I wouldn't want all my assets going to a teenager because they're not going to spend it on anything useful. I mean, when I was 15, I spent most of my money on eyeliner and heels. So it's not vastly practical. So a lot of wills, you can specify that you want your kids to be able to get money when they're 25 or when they finish full-time education, rather than if something happens to me, my kids end up with a lot of money, because that causes a lot of different problems in itself.
Wow, that's so amazing. You're writing a book called A Man Is Not a Plan. Where did this creative title come from, and what's the premise of the book?
When I first started working with St. James's Place, which is the financial company, the umbrella on which I work under, my own practice is called the Financial Empowerment Group, and that's what it does. It tends to empower people to feel comfortable with their finances.
It's a great name, actually.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to do a seminar, just see whether or not this is something I could actually turn into a real company. So I did a seminar last April called A Man Is Not a Plan. It was about financial freedom for the modern woman. And I was hoping to get maybe 10 people registered, because if 10 people register for a free event in Hong Kong, maybe 5 will show up. You can have a glass of wine, a couple of nibbles, do the thing I want to do and talk about it. And then hopefully out of that, I can hopefully help some people. I had 120 people register in a couple of days. And it suddenly made me realize that there's a huge amount of women out there who really need help and feel a bit helpless and feel a little bit like it's something that's been on their to-do list since the dawn of time and will always be on their to-do list because it's something that they don't know where to start. It's very overwhelming. If you say, okay, today I'm going to sort out my finances, I'm going to work out what I'm going to invest in. You might open the Financial Times or open, Wall Street Journal or The Economist, and you might say, okay, what do I do? All right, I'll Google, should I buy Apple stock? And if you Google it, 1,000 people will say yes, and 1,000 people will call you an idiot for wanting to do that. And so there's so much information and there's so much white noise, essentially, that it can be absolutely paralyzing. So you might just close the browser and think, well, okay, I can't deal with that today. Maybe I'll keep that on my to-do list for tomorrow or next week or next year and get round to it. And I find a lot of people, a lot of clients who've met with financial advisors in the past and have not necessarily done anything or not felt a connection, and then have sat for another year and then another year and then another year, and then are thinking, well, actually, the time I have put off doing any investments is the time I've been earning the most. A lot of people who move to Hong Kong, a lot of the expats will say, well, I'm only here for 2 years. So there's no point me doing anything because I'm only here for 2 years. Now, I don't know anyone who actually stays for 2 years. You either leave after 18 months or you stay here for 30 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do that. But if you're in the mindset that, oh, I'm only here for 2 years, so I shouldn't do anything, it means that when you go back to wherever you come from, you have this massive hole in your pension planning that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't been an expat. But also you've lost the opportunity because for a lot of us, we're paying a hell of a lot less tax here. A lot of us are on quite generous salaries, and the cost of living in Hong Kong, although high, is generally outstripped by a lot of the benefits. And so making the most of being in Hong Kong, part of that is going to being on junks and going on brunches and seeing Southeast Asia. But it's also making sure that you're making the most of the salary and the money that you've got while you're here so that when you do go home, you've got something to show for it.
That's such an interesting point. I was reading a little article on Bitcoin the other day and it was talking about how much money everybody had made. So I just randomly went and invested $200 with Oasis Trade. I don't even know who they are. I didn't even check them out or anything. It was really stupid. Put my money in. And then I just kept getting these phone calls then from the company wanting me to put more. And I was really getting irritated. They were really pushing me. Whereas because I don't know what I'm doing and I don't want to take too much of a risk, I just wanted that $200 to sit there and see what happens with it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And they irritated me so much. I'm like, right, I'm closing my account. I want my money back. And then I went online and in 6 weeks, I'd made like $75 doing absolutely nothing. So I was like, oh, well, I'll leave it there. So I haven't closed it.
These accounts, they are quite easy to open. You can open these things. And I have one. I mean, I wanted to invest in cryptocurrencies a few years ago. My brother kept telling me to do it. So me and my mum, my brother, we all opened an account and we all put in a couple of thousand US. And that is play money. That is not the money I'm going to retire on. If that money were to go tomorrow, I'd be pissed off, but I wouldn't be heartbroken. It wouldn't affect the way my family live. So I completely get play money. I completely get having a go with some of the stocks and some of the cryptocurrencies and some of the more exciting things. But the backbone of any investments should be something quite dull. And what I deal with is very boring money. I deal with things that are going to be getting you potentially, 4, 5, 6%, but not 50, 60, 70%, because it's not going to be aiming to shoot the lights out because those are huge and high risk investments. What you want to do is have some investments that suit your risk profile and that are aiming to grow above inflation in order to protect the money that you've got sitting in the bank.
When I first got to Hong Kong, I invested $300,000 with some company here in Hong Kong. And really, at the end of the day, when the crash came, I lost $50,000. So I came out of it $50,000 less than what I put in. And that was sort of 10-year investment. So that was just an absolute waste of money. And then since in my 40s, I've bought 2 properties, and I thought that that was a better way to actually invest my money and get a return on my money. And it seems to be working. Do you recommend property to people, or are you more about secure investments within the finance industry?
I actually recommend both. I think we all need a well-rounded portfolio. I don't think that anyone has the monopoly on good ideas. So although what I do is deal with long-term investments, I'm looking at buying a property myself. That's going to be something that hopefully will provide, university fees for our kids as and when. But what will happen is when I invest in property, I try and match what investment I'm making with putting money into an investment that is not property related. So, for example, if I want to buy a property in the UK, which is what we're thinking of doing for £200,000, I'm looking at a deposit of about £40,000 or £50,000. My goal when I buy that is to put a similar amount over the next couple of years into a portfolio that is not property related, that is part of the market. So keeping things very even and making sure that I have a well-rounded portfolio so that if the markets crash like in 2008, then the property's there. But also, if the markets do really well, I'm making the most of that.
When you talk about investing or creating a portfolio within the market that's around a 5 to 6% interest rate, what kind of things might you be looking at?
So
for example,
you're not going to be able to get a 5 to 6% interest rate from any bank at the moment. There's very few currencies that will have an interest rate that's a guaranteed rate for a term deposit at that much. What I look at is I look at a lot of mutual funds where a grown-up is looking after the money. So a fund manager is making the key decisions as to what stocks to buy and sell. The other advantage of mutual funds is you can invest a small amount into a mutual fund, whereas with buying stocks, you might have to have a minimum of 50 to 100 to 1,000 stocks. So let's say you wanted to buy stock in Apple and Facebook and a few other tech firms. It might cost you 10, 15,000 US dollars to be able to buy a little proportion of each one. Whereas you can invest something a lot smaller into a mutual fund that has already bought sections of those companies and get the advantages of
not having to put it all in at once.
Diversification, yes. So you get the advantage of diversification, and you get the advantage of being able to invest and have your money do something on a much larger scale than if you would invest purely in one stock.
That's super interesting. And I wonder, when you're saying a smaller amount, what do you mean? Like, what would be a small amount to invest in a mutual fund?
Look, I know a lot of people who work in the finance industry have a lot of minimums. For example, private banking in Hong Kong, you need to be able to put 8 million Hong Kong dollars. And that's a terrifying amount to a lot of people. So when I set up the Financial Empowerment Group, I think that financial advice and good financial advice should be available to everybody. So I have clients. I have one client who's 23 and she puts a proportion of her tips away each month from working in a restaurant. And I have so much admiration because when I was 23, I spent most of my money on wine, and, stupid stuff. So the fact that she's doing that at 23 is absolutely incredible. And I have people going from that up to CEOs. And I don't think that there should be any discrimination and differentiation between the financial advice that you get. You still need financial advice, whether you have a very small amount of money and you're starting out, or whether you're at the other end of the scale and you're looking at doing something with your retirement fund, for example. And I think that's the problem with financial advice and financial advisors, that sometimes it can feel very disconcerting and very disheartening, where you don't feel like you deserve the financial advice or that you're wasting their time. But the important thing is you've earned that money. You have the right to find out what to do with it. And if you are made to feel uncomfortable by a financial advisor, then just walk out. Because the situation is this: you deserve good advice with what you want to do with your money. And actually, if you've got a very small amount, it's vital that you actually find out what to do with it and to look at something sensible. In the same way that as your career progresses, you're more likely to have more money later on. So I have quite a few clients who've been with me a very long time who started off with a very small investment, but as their career has progressed, they've invested more and more. And they trust me because I was there for them when they were not earning a huge amount. And so now that they are earning a lot more money, they feel comfortable to keep using me as an investment advisor.
When we're talking small amount, though, I guess I just want to know, could somebody with 5,000 Hong Kong dollars spare come to see you?
Absolutely.
Or do they need to have 50,000 Hong Kong dollars?
5,000 is absolutely fine. The smallest amount I would look at doing is probably 1,500 to 2,000 Hong Kong dollars a month.
Right. Per month. Okay. With that amount, could you still, in the mutual funds, get a possible 5 to 6% return?
Yeah, absolutely, you can.
Monthly, yeah? Or annually?
Annually,
yeah. Right, okay, gotcha. Okay, so that's really interesting. I think I'm going to have to come and have an appointment with you. Anyway, back to A Man Is Not a Plan. I absolutely love that title because in society, women have really in the past been kind of conditioned to let the men take control of the finances, or
absolutely.
And we would all think we're going to grow up, we'll maybe get a job, then we'll get married. And it doesn't work that way. There are many, many women out there who are gay or want to be single or can't find a partner, or for whatever reason, they are responsible for their finances. So I absolutely love the title.
I started with that seminar, and that's now turned into an event I do for corporate. So I do that for a lot of different companies in Hong Kong. And some of these are the big banks who, even if they're very senior banking officials, they still don't know what to do with their own finances because it's not necessarily what your main job is. I mean, in the same way that I wouldn't try and run a podcast or be a teacher, I wouldn't expect you to run finances because it's not your passion. It's not the thing that you're qualified for, and it's not the thing that you really are interested in. And so in the same way, I wouldn't try and take my own appendix out. I wouldn't necessarily, trying to find a grown-up to deal with your money is always a good thing. I went with A Man Is Not a Plan because I quite like the title, and it actually came from a gay friend of mine who is very much on the camp end of the scale and tends to say things like a man is not a plan all the time. And I absolutely agree with him. The reason I made it very women focused is I think women have grown up a lot with the Disney-fied version of things. So you've got Cinderella, you've got Sleeping Beauty, you've got these women who are paralyzed by their terrible families or their circumstances until a guy shows up and with a fairly dubious non-consensual kiss, everything gets better. You've got this white wedding and then suddenly they live happily ever after. But the thing is, what happens in happily ever after and how do you structure happily ever after? And I think that's what we don't teach our daughters what to do. In terms of women's finances are different from men's. So we generally get paid less for doing the same job. And that is changing, but it is changing slowly. We generally take breaks for looking after kids or looking after elderly relatives. Quite a lot of us, if you are married, and a lot of us in Hong Kong are in the situation where husbands have moved over here for their jobs and a lot of the wives don't work for a couple of years and take a career break to support the family in the opportunities as an expat. So you've got a lot of women who are earning less and working for a shorter time because we also retire earlier, but we also live longer. So we've got a lot shorter period to earn the money for a lot longer time of not working.
I know. I'm turning 60 in 6 years and I've got to leave my job in 6 years.
Absolutely.
And my nan's alive at 102, nearly.
Well, exactly. So you're looking at 40 odd years of working out how the money that you've earned previously can support you for those 40 odd years. And the longer we live, I mean, people are retiring a lot older these days, and a lot of people are talking about having a second career. And, you know, my mum's a great example of that. She worked in education for years and years and years. And since she's been in retirement, she has done so much good work with working with different charities and working with different schools to use her skills to help out. But for a lot of people, they don't have the luxury of working for charities and doing the pro bono stuff that my mum's been able to do. They need to keep working. And so a lot of people set up their own businesses or look at renting out properties that they've previously purchased. But women just don't have the opportunities to mess it up because it's so vitally important. The other side of that is that previously and traditionally, financial advising and going to a bank to talk to people about their finances is a very male-led industry. I still go to the bank occasionally and they ask to speak to my husband.
That's Hong Kong for you.
It is Hong Kong, but it works elsewhere as well. Sure. Quite a few times I'll get a phone call from the bank and they'll say, is your husband there? And it's like saying, you know, is your mum there?
Yeah.
I mean, is there a designated grown-up who can help you, dear? It's ridiculous and it's incredibly patronising. And then I'll hand the phone to my husband who'll say, look, my wife knows more about this than I do. Talk to her. But it's not just a Hong Kong thing. A lot of people don't teach their kids how to look after their finances because they assume that someone, some magical person, some fairy godmother will come down and teach them how to do it. So when it comes to finances, women's finances are different. And also women can feel very intimidated by financial advisors. And I know that I've been in a situation when I worked for the first company I worked for over here, where women were patronized, where LGBT couples, they had the piss taken out of them. They felt like they were being belittled.
I made a formal complaint about a financial advisor once to the company. He was so patronizing and sexist and vile.
Good.
And I pulled out of that company.
Absolutely.
He was
you
foul.
You should.
He was some young upstart that was completely inappropriate and rude to me.
Well, a lot of financial advisors in Hong Kong tend to be 40-year-old or 50-year-old white middle-class men with stripy ties and bad suits. And that's the situation. So if you're going into all these different companies, you're going to get different treatment from different people, depending on how enlightened they are.
I obviously got the junior.
Well, when I set up the Financial Empowerment Group, I wanted to set up a company where A, I would never have to wear a suit again, and B, I would never let anyone feel intimidated by either me or my staff. So as I've taken on staff, they are of the same mindset as me, where it's all about making sure the customer feels comfortable and can be in a position where they have confidence in telling us about their finances in order for us to help. Because it's a very personal thing. If you're sitting down and saying to someone, well, this is how much I earn and this is how much I save, you need to feel like you're in a safe environment where you know it's confidential and that you know that the information that you're giving them, it will be used to help your finances and not for anything else.
And not be judged.
Absolutely.
I really felt judged and almost ridiculed for how I was managing my money at the time. I think one of the interesting things is I've been single for my daughter's whole 30 years, virtually. I have really been in charge of the money. I've been in charge of the bills. I've bought 2 properties. I'm very good at managing my money. I've been able to
role model
save.
for her.
Well, unfortunately, I still didn't teach her the value of money as a child, as I should have. Now I'm looking back, because I probably felt like I had quite a lot living in Hong Kong. So I really just gave her money and didn't really help her to budget and manage it. I haven't really been that good a role model in that way. But then again, I have for being independent and doing things yourself and making sure that you're in charge of it. But having said all of that, even with all those years' experience, I still don't know how to invest my money or the best way to use it. So that's why coming to see somebody like you could be super, super important and helpful. And the other thing I was thinking was women are having children later now quite often. And so they're responsible financially for those children right up into their 50s and their 60s sometimes, because
Absolutely.
the kids are still in university.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a kid at 40, which is, not
common,
unlikely here, you end up having a kid at 40 and then maybe even later than that, you're going to have a kid that doesn't finish university until you're in your 60s. So if you want to retire in your 50s, you then have to make sure that you have enough money to cover not only you, but also that kid. And to be honest, and my mother would definitely agree with this, kids aren't independent at 21.
No way. They're not.
I think me and my brother were still a pain in the ass to my mother for years.
I was till I was about 30. I think that's the other good point, because I always thought, I can't really invest money because I've got to have it for her school or have it for her uni or help with this or help with that or for emergencies. Whereas if I was able to go back and advise myself 15, 20 years ago, I would be like, invest. Put something away, really do actually split this and work out where you can make your cuts, so that I could have put something away and I could be a lot better off now than I am.
Look, we've all got 20/20 hindsight,
yes.
But the situation is, look, the first thing you need to do is make sure you have emergency money. Hong Kong is a very transient place. If something happened to your job and you couldn't work for a couple of months, or you needed to find a new job, and let's say it took 6 months to do that, do you have enough money to cover your expenses? We usually advise people to have 3 to 6 months in their bank account. However, that changes from person to person. If you've got kids, you might want more money in your bank account. You might think, well, I can always cash in some investments if I need to, so I don't necessarily need that much in my bank account. It really is a personal thing. I know that as your priorities change, your ability to look at risk changes as well. So, for example, if you're young, free and single, you might think, well, I've got a couple of grand in the account. That'll do. That's my emergency money. I'll be fine. Whereas if you're, let's say, in your 40s with your own business and 3 kids, you're going to need a lot more emergency money to make you feel secure. And really, it's a very personal thing. So once you've got the emergency money covered, the other thing is to work out, because you are your own best asset. So if you can't work, what happens? So what I do with a lot of clients is talk about things like life insurance, but also critical illness cover, which a lot of people don't have over here.
Yeah,
so,
I have both.
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, and I work with some of the big banks over here, and they have amazing life cover is very well covered by a lot of different people's companies, but the critical illness is crap. And the critical illness is a vital situation because, look, a lot of people get things like cancers and then they recover. It's not the kiss of death that it used to be. So if you were to get something in your 40s and let's say take 6 months off work and then go back to your job and back to your life and are actually well, that 6 months or 12 months you've taken off work can make a really big impact in your family's finances. So that's what critical illness cover does. It provides a lump sum in case you get sick. It's something I'm going out through with a lot of my clients at the moment. I've written an article about it with Sassy. I write a monthly article for them. And it's something that a lot of people overlook. And if you're in a situation where you are single, then you need to make sure that you have critical illness cover so that you don't end up feeling like you're a burden on your family if you get sick. If you're married, you need to make sure that you have critical illness cover so that you're not a burden on your family. If you have kids, you need critical illness cover. And whatever life stage you're at, you need some kind of cover because the likelihood is 1 in 2 of us will get some kind of critical illness before we're 60. So you'll get something, you'll get better, and then you'll get on with your life. I worked recently with a cancer charity, and a lot of people in Hong Kong think that all cancer treatments will be covered by the government or by their health insurance. And the out-of-pocket expenses, let's say you go to the Queen Mary and you go through the normal medical procedures over here. Realistically, you're looking at somewhere in the region of 230 to 500,000 out of pocket because there's a lot of things that aren't covered by the Hong Kong government. Targeted cancer treatments aren't necessarily covered by the government because they're very expensive. So you might have to pay for those out of pocket and you might have health insurance that covers that. And that's fantastic. However, they don't necessarily cover everything. And your health cover, if it's associated with your job and you're no longer working, that then stops as well. If you're looking at private cover for cancer treatment, sometimes you can be up to 1 to 2 million out of pocket, because that is over and above what your insurance will cover. And so what I've done with a lot of people is I've sat down and gone through, what does your health insurance cover? What are the costs likely to be if you were to get ill? And how can critical illness supplement that so that you get a lump sum of money when you get sick and you don't have to worry about that at all? Because when you're ill, you need to focus all your energy and attention on getting better and not worrying about, can I afford to get a taxi to the hospital?
Oh my gosh, this is so depressing.
Look, it is one of these horrible things. And I do sit down with clients and I do warn them. I say, look, this is not going to be a fun part of the conversation. What happens if you die? And it is not fun. I mean, my husband and I, we've just looked at our critical illness insurance, and it's a bugger to look at, because you have to sit there and think, well, what do my grandparents die of? Is that likely to kill me? How much cover do I need? So if I keel over tomorrow, how much will it cost to put our kids through university and pay off a house? And it is a horrible thing. So much money, yeah. It's a horrible thing to think about, but it's one of those things that it's part of being a grown-up, and adulting sucks. It's expensive and it's horrible.
I teach, that's where I teach. That's what my subject is called in personal and professional skills, where we do all of this. It's called adulting.
Yeah, being an adult really is kind of expensive and annoying at times.
So my critical illness insurance only gives me 500,000 Hong Kong if I get sick.
Okay.
That's not a lot. That's not going to go far. But I also obviously have medical cover in my job, so that would supplement it. And I own 2 properties. So at the end of the day, in a crisis, you could sell one of your properties, couldn't you, if you absolutely had to?
Absolutely, but there is time constraints with that. It depends on where you are in your career. So as someone who is, as you've mentioned, in your 50s.
In my twilight years.
You're more likely to get sick, but you've also got less expenses. Your daughter, you said, was in her 30s.
Yes.
So you don't have young kids that you have to deal with.
Yes,
so if
and I'm so grateful for that.
So if you're in your 30s and you were to get sick, you're less likely to get sick, but it's going to have a much bigger impact, because if you had been in your 30s and got sick, with your daughter being a child and dealing with school fees and helpers
and being alone,
that's when the money is even more important.
Absolutely. I mean, I wish that we had this conversation when I was in my 20s. I really do.
Well, I wish I'd had this conversation with myself when I was in my 20s as well.
I mean, we can have great wisdom with hindsight.
Absolutely.
But, I was here during SARS and I had 300,000 Hong Kong dollars. Like, I could have bought a property for absolutely pennies in Sai Pun or Kennedy Town.
And it would be worth a fortune now.
And it would be worth an absolute fortune now. Like, I wish I had some sort of financial insight and some understanding that the value of buying property in that kind of time. Do you know what I mean?
People didn't know what was going to go on. They didn't know what was going to happen. So when there was the handover...
I guess we all thought we'd all might have to leave Hong Kong.
So when there was the handover, people didn't know whether there'd be tanks coming across the border immediately, and that's why the property prices dropped then. Same thing happened when SARS hit. They didn't know whether or not it would be sort of scorched earth and they'd have to disinfect the whole of Hong Kong, and whether or not Hong Kong could actually continue to function, because it was kind of getting to the stage where my mother-in-law tells me, because she was in the school system then, where the kids couldn't go to school, you weren't encouraged to go to church, you weren't encouraged to have any public anything where you could possibly pick up any illnesses.
And everyone wore masks everywhere.
And everyone was terrified.
Panic buying. And,
absolutely.
It was a bit surreal. It was a little bit like a science fiction movie.
Yeah, and it sounds horrific, but you don't know that that's going to create opportunity in the same way that a lot of opportunity, if you look at the different markets, is created by, the World War II created a lot of financial opportunity, but was horrific. So there's a lot of things that when you have a disturbance like 2008, there is an opportunity to make money. And that's why you really need a good fund manager. Because, look, nobody is going to wave a magic wand and say, I can guarantee I can make money. But if you've got someone who's a grown-up who's dealing with this, then at least you've got the presence of mind and the peace of mind to kind of say, that money is being dealt with by someone who knows what they're doing. I don't need to worry about it. And if you don't have time, I mean, my mum loves having CNBC on 24 hours a day, and it drives us all insane. And she loves trading stocks, and she would absolutely be happy doing that for the rest of time. But a lot of us don't find that interesting, and a lot of people don't have time. I mean, if you are working all day, if you come home from teaching however many kids, you don't necessarily want to open a spreadsheet or start looking at financial papers, and that's really where a fund manager and that's where a good financial advisor can really help. I have no
interest in that, but I must say I did write a note to myself the other day to see if I could do a stock trading course online on Udemy or something like that.
Yeah, there are quite a few of them, and they are quite interesting. but I know that you can set up fake accounts. And actually, I know some parents who've done that with their kids where they've said, right, this is $5,000 and it's not real money. It's money in a fake account that mirrors what's going on in the market. So hypothetically, what would you do with this money? What would you invest in and why? And it's a good way of helping people to understand their finances and understand what the pros and cons of investments are. Because if you've got a kid who invests this hypothetical money and it tanks, then it teaches them a valuable lesson. In the same way, if it goes really well, it teaches them the value of investing. So there's the swings and roundabouts side of things of that as well. And it really does help to create a more interactive atmosphere when it comes to investments.
Is this something that you'd recommend parents could do?
Absolutely.
Like start off with these fake apps for investment and get your kids on it to learn about managing stocks and bonds?
There's a variety of apps out there that can help to teach kids about money. And, kids are much more tech savvy than any of us are these days. So once you have them downloaded, they can work out which app works for you and work out what will actually help to teach their kids. And it can open the conversation up. A lot of people find it really hard to talk about money, both with their kids, but also with their families. And so the more you talk about it, ending the taboos is part of financial freedom. So it's all about seeking advice. It's about actually being honest with yourself and saying, how much do I have now? How much do I need in the future? How do I get to that point? It's not rocket science. It's a very simple process, but it's very hard to do that for yourself if you are not used to doing it or if it scares you.
Absolutely. So that was going to be one of my questions. What is financial freedom?
Well, it means different things to different people. I mean, if you look at my grandparents' generation, they lived in a bungalow. They had enough money to go to Spain once a year. They got a pension every week, and that was financial freedom. And then if you look at my parents' generation, Social Security is not going to pay for much. They are better educated. They might want a property in the UK and a holiday home. And then if you look at my generation, I now live in a different country entirely. So I'm now going to be a third generation kid and our kids are going to have that. So financial freedom really depends on what your background is and what it means to you. It might be as much as I want to be able to go to an ATM when I'm in my 80s and not worry that there's no money in there. But it might also be I want to be living in my beach house in Thailand and be able to fly to my winter house in the UK or France or wherever it might be. And it really is very different for different people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also have clients.
You've got to be realistic, don't
exactly.
you? Yeah.
I mean, I have this wonderful client who I adore. She spent her entire career saving money for her daughter. And when we sat down, we worked out that her daughter now had more money saved up for her and her education than she did for her retirement. And so it was a really wonderful situation where I could say, you've done a really good job, but now you need to think about yourself. And so for a lot of us, it's a bit of a reality check and saying, even if you are determined to put money away for one thing, you might already be financially okay in that area and you might need to focus on something else. And so sitting down and having an MOT and having a little bit of a chat with someone can really open your eyes as to what your priorities are and where you need to be focusing your attention.
Yeah, it's so interesting. With only 6 years to go at work and my daughter just being financially independent over the last few years because she spent so long at university, I've found, investing in this podcast and investing in the book, and I'm going to turn my book into a true crime podcast as well.
Oh, wow.
All of this is costing me a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
And, I don't have any sponsors and, I'm trying to get them. And I'm at a place now where I can have legitimate conversations with people because my downloads are so good and the podcast is doing so well. But I kind of feel a little bit nervous investing money into this. But then I'm hoping that something will grow out of all of this for my next career, which I'm going to have to start at 60 when I finish teaching, because there's no way I'm going to be able to afford to retire. So I'm a bit of shaky ground. Like, really, I probably should stop the podcast, and not have done the book and then just invest all that money so that I've got it for my future. So do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
you're
taking a risk.
investing money and you are taking a risk with that, but you're also investing time. So
a lot of time.
Part of it could be, would it have been better for you to take on a tutoring job in the evenings rather than writing the book? Well, yes and no. But what you've done is you've written a book and it's amazing. And it's a wonderful feeling and it will prepare you for the next stage in what you want to do. And I think a lot of us have these dreams of having, whether it's a B&B somewhere or whether it's writing a book or whether it's learning a foreign language. It's very important to make sure that we do monitor that side as well, because look, Hong Kong is like Disneyland for grown-ups. It's an amazing place where you can do anything. As long as you know someone who can help you, you can do pretty much anything in Hong Kong. You can nip off to Thailand. You can do a brunch. You can sit on a junk over a weekend. It's an amazing, amazing place. But you've got to make sure that as well as seeking the opportunities and having fun, you are seeking the opportunities in finance. But what I do say to a lot of clients is don't feel like you need to be held back by your pension. You don't want to be in a situation where you say, well, I can't do something that would be amazing in my life because Elle says I need to save for my pension.
Yeah.
So it's finding the middle ground in that.
And there are so many rewards to what I'm doing. Like, look at this chat we're having here.
Exactly,
I'm getting so much out
rewards.
of it. Yeah.
This is not something you can take to the bank, but it's something that helps you and makes you feel happy.
Yes.
And I've got friends who have businesses
so rewarding
that are incredibly rewarding, but don't necessarily make a lot of money. And there is an element of that says that sometimes you've just got to choose happiness.
What kind of response do you get to these different seminars that you've been doing? Do people then become your clients? Do they work with you?
Absolutely. So what I tend to do is when I'm at these events, I open my diary up and say, look, there's no obligation, there's no cost. Just come and have a chat, whether it's over a coffee, whether it's a glass of wine, whether it's in a coffee shop, or if it needs to be a little bit more private, we can do that in my office. And I've got an office in Central. What I want to do is just sit down and talk to you about how you feel about your finances. And it's not a scary conversation. I try to make it as unintimidating as possible. And I think I'm quite approachable. I mean, I tend to be quite chatty and we tend to talk about things. And from that, I can find out what the priorities are. So I might meet with someone who needs, for example, a will and critical illness, and they need to do an investment and they need to do X, Y, and Z. But doing everything at once is just a little bit intimidating. So then working out priorities and working out a plan and working out a strategy and then following through and making sure that we execute all of that is part of becoming a client. But also, once you are a client, it's also a case of making sure that you understand exactly what you've invested in and why, and meeting up regularly to see how the investments are progressing, whether or not you need to make any changes, but also how your life is progressing in terms of you might find that you've suddenly been offered an amazing job somewhere else, or you might suddenly find out that you're going to have a child, or that you meet the man of your dreams and you want to get married, or you're getting a divorce. And so it's very important to continuously evolve your plans with your lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is really, really good advice. And that's why having a financial planner that you're having an ongoing relationship with is really good, because life does have twists and turns and changes.
Oh, yeah, it's never a straight journey.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think any of us sat down when we were in our, mummy, one day I want to grow up and live in Hong Kong. I mean, it's one of those things that, we've all ended up here in a very different way. And what I do is I have this most amazing job where I sit down with fascinating people and hear about how they got to Hong Kong and what their plans are for their lives. And for some reason, it's a job. I'm very privileged in the fact that a lot of people sit down with me and I get to hear about all these amazing women and what they've done in their lives and what their ambitions are and what their passions are. And my job is to basically help them to reach their potential. And it's such a privilege to be in that position.
I bet it's quite rewarding.
It's amazing. It really is. I still find it hard to think of it as a job when this is what I do all day. It's phenomenal.
Can you think of an anecdotal story of somebody whose life you've had a really significant impact on?
Well, I hope I've had a significant impact on quite a few of them. But look, I've got a client at the moment who I've known for a very long time. And he and his wife, they have a child and they're sitting down with me and they've worked out they have no will, they have no insurance, they have no investments. And they're in a position where they can actually make some significant changes and significant investments at this point in their lives in their early 30s. That means that they will definitely retire by the time they're 50.
Oh, see, that's I needed
magical.
You at 30, yeah.
But equally, like I said, I've sat down with people who are in their 50s and 60s who have been in a position where they don't know what they're invested in. They've continuously bought things. So I've got a client who basically said, look, I bought something from HSBC. I bought something from Manulife. I bought something from AIA. I don't really know what they are. I just signed it because the person was persuasive. I think I've got insurance. I'm not sure. Here is 3 months worth of statements of things that were sent to me and I didn't want to open. Can you tell me what I have and where it is? And when you get into a situation where you've got someone who thinks they've invested in some things, but they're not entirely sure and they just want some clarity, even just putting into a format that they can recognize what they've invested in and just kind of go, right, well, that was a good idea that you did that 10 years ago. This one, it's done bugger all for you so far. Let's get rid of it and take that money and do something more proactive with it. And to go through all the different investments, because a lot of people have these bits and bobs where they've invested, I mean, as you said, invested 20 years ago. either did well or it didn't do well, or you've completely lost track of who and what is actually invested in. And a lot of people have pensions in other countries as well, and they just want to keep an eye on things. So sitting down with the client to amalgamate everything they've got and to try and work out, if you've got 5 MPFs and a pension in the UK and a pension in Australia, and, potential insurance through your work, and then something that you got from HSBC 20 years ago, but you're not entirely sure what it is. Trying to work out exactly what that is kind of a challenge. It's really interesting to be able to do that for people.
Yeah. You do advise people as well on their MPF and whether to go, is it like standard, middle risk or high risk?
Depends on everyone's risk appetite. So we do a risk profile with people. It also depends on what else you've got. So I've got clients, for example, who've got a big portfolio in Australia. They've got a decent global portfolio over here. So what they've done with their MPF is they've gone for a lot of Chinese stocks because it's a good way of having a little bit of money going in that regularly, and it complements the other portfolios they've got. So it's all about looking at the bigger picture. It's not looking at just the MPF or just your pension in Australia or just the investment that you're making with, let's say, $100,000 that you've saved up. It's looking at what is the bigger picture. So you're not in a situation where you've got Apple stock in 5 different places. Then if Apple tanks, you hit 5 different ways. It's making sure you've got a very diversified and well-rounded portfolio.
I'm convinced. I need to come and talk to you about investment and MPF. Luckily,
Absolutely.
I've got my will, I've got my life insurance, I've got my critical illness
You're already
insurance.
on the way.
Yeah, but I definitely need to come and speak to you about my MPF and some investments. If you could wave a magic wand in relation to your finances, what would you like to change or fix? Or in relation to finance in general?
Relation to my finances, I wish I'd started earlier. I think a lot of people say to me, well, when's a good time to invest? How do you time the market? The investment advice I can give you is, when's the best time to invest? Now. When was a better time to invest? Yesterday.
Last week, yeah.
Yeah. When was an even better time? 20 years ago. And the earlier you invest, the better you're going to be doing. Markets go up in general over time. So it's more about time in the market than it is about timing the market. It's making sure the money is in there and that it's being managed properly.
Oh, I like that. That's a great quote. There's my little quote for my social media from you. And what have you learned about yourself through this journey?
When I first started working in finance, I worked in a very male-led industry where I don't know whether intimidated or bullied is probably the right word, but I was kind of told that my opinions didn't matter because I'm a girl. And I was 24 and very unexperienced when I got here, but I have worked very hard to get a lot of different credentials and a lot of different qualifications and to develop the gravitas and the experience to be able to talk with authority on what I do. And I think the older I get and the more experience I have, the less patient I am with people who are not prepared to listen. And the thing that I have really found over the last couple of years, the confidence that comes with setting up my own business and the confidence that comes with knowing that what I'm doing is doing good is undescribable, absolutely indescribable. Because when I worked for other companies, when I worked for other banks, there was always someone above me who was setting different things. But when you work for yourself, and if you're passionate about what you do, it doesn't really feel like work. It's something that's really fun. And I feel now that my career and all the experiences I've had, whether they've been good or bad, have sort of led up to this position where I can sit there and say, you know what, I have dealt with a lot of crap. And I know that it's been hard. And I know that I've come out the other side. And if I can help other women and other people to feel in control and in power of what they're doing, even if it's just their finances, I'm doing good in the world.
Yeah,
and I'm helping people.
That's amazing. Do you work with clients outside of Hong Kong?
I am mainly licensed in Hong Kong. I've had previous licenses elsewhere, but I also work for an international company where I know people who I can refer people to.
Right.
So in terms of, I've got friends in Australia, I've got friends in Singapore, friends in China. Oh yeah, I've got friends all over the place where I can refer people to.
If any of my listeners, particularly women or members of the LGBTQ community, would like to contact you for more advice on their finances, how can they do that?
They can email me. So it's Eleanor, ELEANOR .Coleman, COLEMAN @sjpp.asia, or call my mobile, 9885-2192. That's a Hong Kong number.
Awesome.
And I'm absolutely fine to talk to anyone about whatever they need to talk about.
Brilliant. Eleanor, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been absolutely fantastic. I am so motivated. When I get back from my holiday, I'm going to come and see you for sure, because this time in my life is exactly the right time for me to be getting serious about planning for my retirement and stop talking about it and actually do something. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
For my listeners out there, if this is a podcast that you think your friends or family will enjoy, please can you share it with them? And if you could go to iTunes and rate and review us, it would be amazing for me, and it will get Eleanor more clients in Hong Kong. And please go to Patreon and support me, even for $1 a month. That will help all my costs of my editing and running the podcast and all of the work that I do involved in this. And if you go to Patreon and search for Hong Kong Confidential, then you will be able to support me, and that would be absolutely amazing. Thanks again, Eleanor. It's been amazing chatting to you.
Thank you, Jules.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.